Imagine a year in history, a real turning point, but it's defined, well, not by a king or a battle in the usual sense. It's defined by an animal.
Right, specifically an elephant, a war elephant named Mahmud.
Exactly. And that single image, that elephant, is really the heart of the story we're diving into today. We're talking about the al-Fil.
The year of the elephant.
Yeah, the year of the elephant.
It's arguably one of the most foundational periods in early Islamic history, and also one of the most, well, dramatically disputed ones, too.
So that's our mission for this deep dive, then. To unpack the sources around this event, we're looking at roughly 570, maybe 571 CE.
That's the traditional time frame, yes.
Yeah.
And it's crucial to understand, this isn't just, a dry military report. It's a deep story about the sacredness of a place, belief, and even about how people started marking time.
And that significance really hits on two levels for you, the listener. First, and maybe most importantly for many, it's widely accepted as the year the Prophet Muhammad was born. That gives it immense religious weight, obviously. But second, just purely historically, before the Islamic calendar became standard, this event, the specific failure of the Elephant Army, it became the reference point. It was the way people dated things across the Arabian Peninsula.
That's how big a deal it was. It shook the region. So what we're setting up here is a major clash. You've got imperial ambition, Christian ambition specifically, from the south, running right up against traditional Arab worship centered on Mecca. And it all leads to this incredibly dramatic military failure right outside the city, and a failure whose cause is still debated.
Okay, let's start with the aggressor. To understand the invasion, we need to look south to Yemen. We have Abraha. He's the Abyssinian Christian king of Himyar.
Right. He controlled Yemen at the time as an Aksumite viceroy, essentially.
So why? Why did he decide to march this huge, sophisticated army all the way north, hundreds of miles towards Mecca? What was the point?
Well, fundamentally, you could argue it was really about power and money wrapped up in religious terms. It was almost like economic warfare.
Economic warfare. How so?
Mecca's importance wasn't just spiritual. It was the center of a very lucrative pilgrimage route. The Kaaba drew people, and people meant trade, wealth, influence. Abraham wanted a piece of that, or rather, he wanted to redirect it entirely.
Ah, okay. So he wasn't just trying to conquer Mecca, he wanted to replace it.
Precisely. He had invested, poured vast resources into building this absolutely stunning cathedral back in his capital, Sana'a. It was called Al-Quways.
Al-Quways, that sounds not Arabic.
It's not. It's actually a loan word, probably from the Greek ekklesia, meaning church. He built this grand statement piece.
And his goal with Al-Quways was literally to pull the pilgrims away from the Kaaba.
Yes. He wanted all Arab worship and the trade that came with it to flow south to Sana'a instead. He even openly proclaimed Al-Quways was purer than the Kaaba.
Wow, that's a direct challenge.
A very direct challenge. And you also see this huge cultural gap, this friction between his sort of imperial administration and the fiercely independent Arab tribes. He tried to market his new religious center, He sent out an envoy, a guy named Muhammad ibn Khuzai.
And the sources, they give us these fascinating little details here that really show that friction, don't they? Like that story about the feast.
Oh, yeah, the feast. It's quite something. Abraha hosts some Arab delegates trying to win them over, presumably.
And he serves.
Yeah.
Well, the text mentioned animal testicles.
Right, which might have been a delicacy in his culture, perhaps, Abyssinian or Himyarite custom. But for the visiting Arabs, it was deeply offensive, shameful even. They refused to eat it.
And Abraha was just confused.
Totally confused. He had to actually reassure them. Like, no, no disrespect, this is fine. It just shows how little he understood the people he was trying to dominate.
He couldn't even get a diplomatic dinner right.
Pretty much. And that kind of misunderstanding, that lack of cultural grasp, it quickly boiled over into something much worse. His envoy, Muhammad ibn Khuzai, the one sent to promote Al-Quways.
Yeah.
He travels north, reaches the territory of the Kina tribe. The locals recognize him, know what he's there for, and a man from the Hudhal clan shoots him dead. Just like that.
Okay, so that's the spark, the direct killing of his representative.
That was the trigger.
Yeah.
It wasn't just an insult to Abraha personally. It was a direct defiance of the Aksumite power he represented. Ibn Ishaq, the early historian, he notes this killing increased Abraha's rage and fury.
And that's when he makes the vow.
That's when he swears vengeance. But not just broadly against the tribe, no. He swears specifically to destroy the Kaaba itself, the ultimate symbol they were defending. His oath was explicit. Destroy the house.
And the invasion he launched, it matched that level of fury, didn't it? The scale was enormous.
Colossal for the time and place. Sources like Ibn Ishaq cite an expeditionary force of 60,000 men marching on Mecca.
60,000 in the Arabian Peninsula in the 6th century. That's hard to even picture.
It's a staggering number. And the really terrifying part for the Arabs, the thing that symbolized this overwhelming imperial power, was the technology he brought.
The elephants.
The war elephants. Accounts vary, some say just one main one, some say several, maybe up to 8. But their mere presence was exotic, hugely intimidating. Unstoppable, it must have seemed.
And we have to talk about the main one, the star of this whole year, really. The lead elephant, Mahmud.
Mahmud, yes. The sources say he wasn't just any elephant Abraha had lying around. He was supposedly sent specifically for this mission.
Sent by whom?
By Najashi, the Negus, the king of Abyssinia himself. Sent to Abraha explicitly to help breach Mecca's defenses, to destroy the Kaaba. He was like a purpose-built siege weapon.
So you have this massive, technologically advanced army bearing down on Mecca. What about the defense? What could the Meccans even do?
Well, the local Arab tribes, the Quraysh, who controlled Mecca, the Banu Qina nearby, others that tried to form a coalition. But it was shaky from the start.
Why shaky? Internal rivalries.
Exactly. Lots of infighting, old grudges, tribal jealousies. Some local leaders probably even saw Abraha's invasion as a chance maybe to knock the Quraysh down a peg or to ally with this powerful king against their own rivals.
So Abraham could exploit those divisions?
Oh, certainly. He knew about the fragmentation. He even sent messengers ahead, apparently assuring some tribes, look, I don't have a quarrel with you. I only want to demolish the Kaaba, trying to neutralize potential opposition.
Which brings us to Muhammad's grandfather, Abdul Muttalib. He was a major leader of the Quraysh at the time.
A very influential figure, yes.
And while most Meccans, understandably terrified, fled into the hills for safety as the army approached, he didn't. He stayed. He and a few other Quraysh leaders remained near the Kaaba.
That's the tradition, yes.
So why? Why stay when this unstoppable force is minutes away? Was it political defiance? A calculated risk? Or was it just pure faith?
The way it's presented in the sources, it's framed as an ultimate act of faith in divine protection. There's that famous story of his meeting with Abraha.
Right, where Abraha is impressed by him. But Muttalib supposedly only asks for his stolen camels back.
Exactly. Abraha is apparently baffled, like, I'm here to destroy your sacred shrine and you're worried about your camels. But Muttalib's reported reply is key. He said something like the camels have an owner, me, who looks after them, and this house, the Kaaba, it also has an owner who will defend it.
Basically telling Abraha, that's God's problem, not mine.
In a way, yes. It's this bold, almost dismissive statement of faith. And after that meeting, he was heard praying at the Kaaba, saying, the owner of this house is its defender, and I am sure he will save it from the attack of the adversaries. He was projecting total conviction.
Okay, so the stage is set. Massive army, symbolic elephant, defiant leader placing his trust in God. And then comes the moment everything hinges on.
The dramatic climax, or anticlimax, depending on how you see it. The army advances. 60,000 men, the elephants, the imperial might, all ready to crush Mecca. They reach the boundary, a place called Wadi Muhassar, right outside the sacred precinct. And according to the traditional sources, the lead elephant, Mahu, he just stops, kneels down, and refuses to go any further towards Mecca. They try to force him, beat him, turn him, but he won't enter the sacred territory.
A single elephant kneeling down halts the entire invasion.
That's the story. A moment of incredible, almost unbelievable defiance by the animal itself.
And that refusal, that's the lead-in to the really famous part, the part that ends up in the Quran itself.
Exactly. The elephant's refusal sets the stage for what happens next in the traditional narrative, which is immortalized in Surah 105 of the Quran, Al-Fil, the elephant.
Okay, so what does the surah describe?
It describes a miraculous divine intervention. After the elephant halts, suddenly a dark cloud appears. It's made up of small birds, called ababil in the text.
Ababil birds, okay.
And these birds are carrying something. Small stones, or pebbles, described as sigil, baked clay in their beaks and claws. Yes. And they fly over Abraha's army and basically bombard them with these stones. The description is incredibly vivid. The stones hit the soldiers and smash them, leaving the army like eaten straw or chewed up chaff, utterly destroyed.
And Abraham himself.
The tradition says he was badly wounded in this bombardment and died during the retreat back towards Yemen. A catastrophic, divinely inflicted defeat.
Okay, that's the powerful foundational story. miraculous birds, divine stones, the Kaaba saved. But this is where, as you said, the deep dive gets really interesting because of scholarly debate.
This is where things take a fascinating turn. While that miraculous account is absolutely central theologically, some scholars, digging really deep into the language of the Quran and early commentaries, proposed a very different interpretation.
An alternative explanation for the army's destruction.
A radically different one, yes. This view was really championed in the modern era by thinkers like Muhammad Assad, but he was drawing on hints and interpretations from much earlier classical commentators, people like al-Zamakhshari and Fakhr al-Din al-Razi.
Okay, so what's the core of this alternative reading? How do they reinterpret birds dropping stones?
It really hinges on linguistics, on the specific words used in the Quran. Assad, for example, argued that the phrase stones of sigil, hijaram min sigil, doesn't necessarily have to mean literal physical stones.
What else could it mean?
He suggests it could be understood metaphorically, denoting something like stone-hard blows of chastisement preordained, like a punishment decreed by God that hits with the force of stones.
Okay, so a metaphorical stoning from the sky. But how does that explain the army being wiped out?
This is the crucial link Assad and others made. They connected this interpretation directly to reports of a sudden, virulent epidemic that struck Abraha's camp.
An epidemic, like a disease.
Exactly. And this isn't just speculation. They point straight back to the earliest historical sources, specifically Ibn Ishaq again. Ibn Ishaq explicitly notes that this campaign, this Year of the Elephant, marked the very first time that spotted fever, hasba, and smallpox, judari, appeared in the land of the Arabs.
Wait, smallpox. So the alternative theory is that the army wasn't destroyed by miraculous birds, but by a devastating outbreak of smallpox or a similar disease.
That's the core of it, yes. A sudden, catastrophic epidemic that swept through the tightly packed army camp.
Okay, that's a huge leap. How do you get from the Quran's description of flying creatures and stones to a plague? Where's the actual linguistic connection? That seems like the missing piece.
That is the most clever and controversial part of the argument. The connection comes through the Arabic word hasba itself, the word Ibn Ishaq uses for the spotted fever that broke out.
Okay, hasba, fever, what about it?
Well, Assad and others pointed out that according to many classical Arabic dictionaries, like the famous Al-Qamus, one of the primary meanings of the root word hasaba isn't just fever, it's pelting or smiting with stones.
Seriously, the word for the fever literally means pelting with stones.
That's the argument. So the very name of the disease that historically coincides with the event linguistically mirrors the Quran's description of the punishment, stone-hard blows, or pelting. It makes the description of divine punishment entirely compatible with the sudden onset of a disease like smallpox, which causes painful pustules like being struck.
Wow. Okay, that actually connects. So the stones of sigil could be a metaphor for the agonizing effects of the plague.
That's the interpretation. The stone-hard blows of chastisement are the lesions and the swift death brought by the disease. And then there's the tear.
The flying creatures, the birds, how do they fit the epidemic theory?
Well, the word tear, while often translated as birds, can more broadly mean any flying creature. That could include birds, yes, but it could also mean insects.
Insects, like flies, mosquitoes.
Potentially. Assad suggests that if the event was a disease outbreak, these tear might represent the carriers of the infection clouds of flies or mosquitoes swarming the unsanitary army camp and spreading the virulent disease, like smallpox or perhaps typhus, very rapidly.
So the birds are disease vectors, and the stones are the plague itself.
In this reading, yes. The army would have been utterly devastated, left like eaten straw, not by pebbles, but by the swift, gruesome, and unstoppable spread of a deadly epidemic.
That is a staggering reinterpretation. It shifts the event from pure miracle to something potentially explainable by, well, divinely ordained natural causes, maybe. Biological warfare, almost.
It's a powerful alternative reading that tries to harmonize the historical account of the plague with the Quranic text.
But hold on. If this epidemic explanation exists, and it was even recorded by Ibn Ishaq way back then, why did the traditional interpretation, the literal birds and stones, become the dominant one? Why wouldn't commentators stick with the disease explanation if it was historically plausible?
That's a complex question. It likely involves several factors. Firstly, the power of miracle narratives in establishing religious truth and demonstrating divine favor is undeniable. An outright, unambiguous miracle like birds defeating an army is perhaps a theologically stronger sign of the Kaba's protection than a disease, however devastating.
It's a clearer, more direct sign of God's intervention.
Exactly. Also, you have the ambiguities of language and oral tradition being written down. The Quranic language is famously dense and multi-layered. Over time, the more literal, miraculous interpretation might simply have become more appealing or easier to transmit.
And perhaps the epidemic details faded somewhat compared to the dramatic core story.
Possibly. And we absolutely have to mention, this linguistic interpretation by Assad isn't universally accepted by scholars today. Some, like Neil Robinson, critique his methodology, arguing that he stretches the linguistic possibilities too far and that the traditional, literal reading of the birds and stones is more straightforward.
So there's still significant debate, even among modern scholars, about how to read Surah Al-Fil.
Definitely. It remains a point of active discussion. Was it a direct miracle, a divinely guided natural disaster, or something else? The text allows for multiple layers.
Okay, so interpretation is complex. What about the simple facts, like the date? We've been saying 570 CE, but you mentioned earlier even that's not set in stone.
That's right. Even the basic chronology, the anchor point of this whole story, has some historical wrinkles. While 570 CE is the most widely accepted date, especially because of its link to the Prophet Muhammad's birth year.
Yeah.
More recent archaeological discoveries, particularly inscriptions found in southern Arabia relating to Abraham's reign and campaigns, suggest the military expedition might have actually happened slightly earlier.
Earlier? Like when?
Maybe 569 or even 568 CE. This slightly earlier dating actually aligns a bit better with other known historical events.
Such as?
Such as the Sasanian Persian Empire moving in and overthrowing the Aksumite-affiliated rulers in Yemen, which happened right around 570 CE. The historical context kind of implies Abraham's defeat weakened the Aksumite hold just before the Persians took over. So a 568 or 569 date for the failed invasion fits that geopolitical shift quite neatly.
Interesting. So archaeology pushes it back a year or two. Does that contradict the link to Muhammad's birth?
It complicates it, certainly. If the elephant year was 568, but Muhammad was born in 570, then he wasn't born in the year of the elephant, but shortly after. It depends on which date you prioritize the traditional link or the archaeological evidence.
And are there other traditions about the date?
Yes, there are older Islamic historical traditions as well. Some sources, attributed to the very early scholar Ibn Shihab al-Zuhri, actually place the year of the elephant even earlier than that, potentially before the birth of Muhammad's father, Abdullah.
Wow, okay. So the dating is really quite fluid in the early sources.
It shows how establishing precise chronology back then was difficult. But what's really crucial is that despite these discrepancies, whether it was 568, 569, 570, or even earlier, the event itself was so monumental, so unforgettable.
That it became the reference point anyway.
Exactly. It became the fixed point around which other events were oriented for at least a generation. We even see this reflected in Shia tradition, for instance. There's a hadith stating that Ali, the fourth caliph, and a hugely important figure, was born in the 20th year after the year of the elephant.
So even decades later, they were still counting from that one event.
Precisely. It illustrates just how profoundly the defeat of Abraha resonated across all early Islamic traditions. It was the undisputed historical anchor, the baseline for marking time, regardless of the exact calendar year we'd assign it today.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then. We've really gone deep into just a single year, the Am al-Fil, the year of the elephant. And it acts as this incredible crossroads. You've got military history with this massive army and its war elephants.
You have foundational religious narrative, the story of divine protection for the Kaaba.
You potentially have early epidemiology with the devastating smallpox outbreak theory.
And you have the very basis of chronology and timekeeping for whole society.
And the entire epic story hinges on an enraged king, his giant army, and fundamentally one specific war elephant, Mahmud, who reportedly just stopped, knelt down at the crucial moment.
That refusal, whether literal or symbolic, ushered in this dramatic failure that became so significant it named an entire era.
So what's the big takeaway for us, looking back at this complex event?
I think the Year of the Elephant really shows us how certain critical events, often traumatic ones, become the bedrock upon which we build our sense of history, our measure of time itself.
Even if the details of that event get debated and reinterpreted for centuries.
Especially then. The fact that it can be read as a direct miracle or as a catastrophic epidemic, and that both readings find support in the sources and linguistic analysis, tells you a lot about how history and faith intertwine. how meaning is made.
Right. The event's impact was undeniable, even if its exact nature remains open to interpretation.
Precisely. It became the fixed point, the shared memory, the year zero for that generation, regardless of the mechanics of the army's destruction.
Okay, so we'll leave you, the listener, with a final thought to chew on, building on that ambiguity. If we lean towards the interpretation that Abraham's army was indeed devastated by a natural event like a smallpox epidemic, and that the language of the Quran itself might actually reflect that reality through words like hasba, how might acknowledging that possibility, that divine intervention could work through natural disaster, through plague, how might that deepen or change your understanding of the relationship between God's will and the natural world in historical and religious stories? It's something to think about.